river was silent, except for the whisper of the wind and the gentle lapping of waves against the woven basket. A child lay inside, wrapped in the warmth of his mother's love. Though she was no longer near, her prayers protected him. The river carried more than a child that night. It carried a prophecy, a child chosen by fate, a child who will rise against an empire. But for now, he is but a fragile soul, cradled in the hands of destiny. Through the reeds and rippling currents, the basket drifted, nudged forward by unseen hands. The Nile was vast, dangerous. Its depths, home to creatures both great and small. A crocodile's golden eyes pierced the murky water, watching, waiting. But the basket slipped past untouched, as if protected by an unseen force. Above, the sun began its slow ascent, casting its golden glow upon the river's restless tide. Further ahead, where the grand palace of Pharaoh loomed over the water, a woman walked along the banks. Queen Asiya. She was dressed in the finest silk, gold bracelets adorning her wrists. Yet, her heart carried a longing far greater than any riches could fill. She gazed across the river, lost in thought, until something caught her eye. A small, unassuming basket, cradled in the reeds. Something inside stirred. Curious, she stepped forward, her breath hitching as she knelt and slowly peeled back the cover. And there, beneath the soft linens, was a child. His tiny face, peaceful, despite the chaos that had sent him adrift. His small fingers reached up, as if sensing the warmth of her presence. And in that moment, she felt something she had never known before, a love that struck like lightning. She had no children of her own, and now, it felt as though this child had been sent to her by the heavens themselves. But love alone could not decide his fate. The halls of Pharaoh's palace were cold, and the man who ruled them, colder still. When Asiya carried the child through those towering doors, murmurs spread like wildfire. A child from the river, cradled in the arms of the queen, a child who bore no royal blood. He was brought before Pharaoh, his tiny frame, dwarfed by the vastness of the throne room. The torches that lined the walls flickered, casting twisted shadows upon the stone. The air was thick with uncertainty. Pharaoh studied the child, his gaze sharp, calculating. He had heard the whispers of prophecies, the warnings of a boy who would rise and threaten the throne. And now, here was a child, delivered by the river itself, without name, without origin. The queen stood tall before him, her expression unyielding. She had taken this child into her heart, and she would not let him go. There was no certainty of his lineage, no proof that he was of the enslaved people. But there was also no denying the unease that settled within Pharaoh's chest. Asiya's voice, steady, yet urgent, filled the chamber. She spoke of the god's will, of how the river had chosen this child, and how denying him a place in the palace would be defying fate itself. She spoke of love, of longing, of the emptiness that had weighed on her heart for so long. Pharaoh, his jaw clenched, countered with caution. The kingdom was not a place for the unknown, not a place for strays plucked from the water. He reminded her of the dangers that lurked in uncertainty, of the whispers that had reached his ears. A ruler could not afford to be blinded by emotion. But Asiya did not yield. She stepped forward, her eyes locked onto his. This was not just any child. This was her son now. She would raise him as her own, shape him into a prince, a worthy heir to the throne. Pharaoh hesitated, caught between the weight of his crown and the fire in his queen's eyes. And for the first time in years, he relented. The child would stay. Yet, even as he agreed, Pharaoh could not shake the shadow that lingered in his mind. The river had brought this child to them. But what else had it carried with it? That night, the palace echoed with the cries of the child. No nursemaid could calm him. No food could ease his hunger. It was as though he rejected the very walls that surrounded him. Asiya, desperate, did not know what to do, but someone else did. A young girl stood at the palace gates, her heart pounding in her chest. She had followed the basket, unseen, unheard. She had seen it pulled from the river, seen the queen's hands lift the child, her brother. And now, she saw the chaos within the palace, the cries of an infant that refused to be soothed. Summoning every ounce of courage, she stepped forward. She offered a solution. A woman who could nurse the child. One who would quiet his restless cries. Desperation outweighed hesitation, and Asiya agreed. The girl turned and ran, her feet barely touching the ground as she made her way through the city, to the home of a woman who had spent the night in sorrow, believing her child was lost to her forever. When Jochebed arrived at the palace, she was trembling. She did not know if she would be permitted to stay, if her disguise as a simple wet nurse would be enough. But the moment she laid eyes on her son, all fear melted away. He quieted instantly, reaching for her, knowing her without needing to see her. She held him close, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She had let him go once. Now, for a little while longer, she had him again. Years passed. The child grew into a boy, running through the vast halls of the palace, untouched by hardship. He was taught by the greatest scholars, adorned in the finest silks, a prince among men. And yet, something always pulled him beyond the palace walls. In the distance, past the grand courtyards and towering statues of Pharaoh, the Hebrew slaves toiled beneath the unforgiving sun. He did not know why he watched them, why the sight of their suffering stirred something deep within him. But soon, he would. He was raised as a prince, but his soul belonged elsewhere. He did not yet know. But soon, the weight of an entire people's suffering would rest upon his shoulders, and he would become a man remembered for eternity.